This is Democracy,
a podcast about the people of the United States.
A podcast about citizenship,
about engaging with politics and the world around you.
A podcast about educating yourself on today's important issues
and how to have a voice in what happens next.
Welcome to our new episode of This is Democracy. We are going to discuss today the role of state attorneys general, those individuals elected in every state in the union to play the role as the highest law enforcement officer in each respective state. These are races that often do not get nearly as much attention as governor races or Senate races. But as we've learned in recent months and years, attorneys general, not just at the federal level, but at the state level, play an absolutely crucial role around elections, around enforcement of the law, around environmental issues, and a whole range of things that are essential to our democracy, issues we discuss every week, issues we know our listeners always want to hear more about. So this week we're going to talk to someone who is running to be the state attorney general in Arizona. This is Kris Mayes. Kris is the Democratic candidate for Attorney General in Arizona. As I said, she has served on the Arizona Corporation Commission from 2003 to 2010, and she's a professor at the Sandra O'Connor's College of Law at Arizona State University. Kris, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Jeremy. It's great to be here.
Before we get into our discussion with Kris, we have, of course, our poem from Mr. Zachary Suri. Zachary, what's the title of your poem?
Prayer at the Sickbed of Truth.
Wow, I'm a little concerned to hear this, but let's go.
Before a dozen empty seats, talk and talk. They find us napping and build a city of lies. It chips away into powder like talc, like talc. It's not like it matters who lives and who dies. In the windows as our forests burn, great urn. On the street, in the schools, it bakes, boils, and fries. The earth will, yes, continue to turn. Don't learn. There isn't anything but what your money buys. Please, ask me again if this is real. It's real. Ask me again if you should just do what you please. Ask me again, I beg, is this real? It's real. Or the sky can't be blue. The dog has no fleas. Before a dozen empty seats, talk and talk. Look, do you see it? Tell me, do you hear the cries? We are hurt, we are hurting. They squawk, they squawk. Yes, there is still truth. Do you hear how it cries?
I love it, Zachary. What is your poem about?
My poem is about the fact that our society really no longer has as prominent a two-sided political discourse. Instead, we have one side that is trying to simply do the minimum to continue the rule of law and truth in our society, and another side that is trying that has built a sort of political campaign, a political platform in fantasy, and the way in which we simply need to call that out and not stand for it.
Kris, do you agree?
Well, there certainly, thank you, Zachary. There certainly is a lot of that in Arizona right now, unfortunately, in the Republican Party. And we have three candidates for statewide office here, the top statewide offices, who are engaged in a lot of that kind of behavior. So, yeah, there are echoes of your poem, unfortunately, in our political system right now.
And why, Kris, is the role of Attorney General that you're clearly devoting your career to, and there are many other things you could do, you're devoting yourself to this. Why is that position so important for protecting truth and law?
Well, I mean, the Attorney General's office in almost any state is the top law enforcement officer in the state and the top legal officer in the state. You are responsible, the AG is responsible for representing state agencies, representing the state before the United States Supreme Court, for upholding the rule of law, for upholding and enforcing the Constitution. and enforcing laws, and also for making sure we have free and fair elections, enforcing election law. And unfortunately, in our state, we have a Republican Party, or at least the leadership of the Republican Party, that it would appear no longer actually believes in the rule of law, no longer believes in democracy, and is willing to go to great lengths to undermine democracy. And I think you see that in a lot of the actions around the fraud that happened out here, the efforts to send fake electors to Congress in the 2020 elections, and and ultimately in the candidates that have just been nominated by the party for governor, for attorney general, and for secretary of state.
Why is it, Kris, that people can run for attorney general and not believe in the rule of law? It would seem that that's a requirement for that position, right?
Yeah, I mean, it is a bare minimum. At bottom, you've got to believe in the rule of law. You've got to believe in upholding law and protecting the Constitution, enforcing the Constitution. And so, yeah, it's hard to believe. I mean, really, it's surreal in a lot of ways that we have gotten to this point in Arizona and in other states. But that's where we're at. It's a very dangerous place to be, and I do not think it's hyperbolic to say that in many ways American democracy runs through the state of Arizona in 2022, because if we elect an attorney general or a secretary of state or a governor who refuses, for instance, to certify the 2024 election, then we will essentially have lost our democracy. And attorney general races are particularly important in this regard, because not only are they usually a part of the certification process for presidential elections, for elections, they also are responsible for making sure that our election laws are followed. And if we have an AG in any of these states who refuses to do that, it puts our country, our democracy, our republic in grave peril.
Taking a quick step back, I think many of our listeners are aware of the importance of attorneys general, and maybe vaguely aware of the role that they play in their states. But could you maybe, for others, describe what the specific responsibilities and powers of an attorney general are, maybe with Arizona as an example?
Yeah, I mean, the powers are very broad, actually, in most states. And so, like I said, the attorney general usually represents state agencies, is the lawyer on behalf of state agencies. So that's sort of the basic duty of the AG. But attorney generals often, in my case, would be responsible for prosecuting white collar crime, for going after drug smuggling and drug smuggling offenses. For instance, we have a fentanyl crisis in our state. There's public corruption, so I would be responsible for prosecuting public corruption wherever it is, whether it's in government or elsewhere. One of the huge responsibilities of most AG's office is to prosecute consumer fraud. And, for instance, last year alone in Arizona, we had 15,000 complaints of consumer fraud. Those were just the complaints that were filed with the AG's office. We're seeing so many more efforts to scam our senior citizens and to scam consumers. And we have to have AGs who really are focused on prosecuting that consumer fraud. The attorney general in most states also is responsible for instance, entering into class action lawsuits on behalf of the states and for settling those kinds of cases. So the opioid settlement was done by AGs across the country. The Volkswagen case was done by attorney generals across the country. And then, of course, there's other issues like in our state, water. One of the things we're dealing with today is a water crisis in Arizona, and the AG needs to be involved in the settlement negotiations around the Colorado River. I just finished a press conference where I said, we are going to go after instances where, we had just had a situation out here where our state land department allowed a Saudi Arabian company, a Saudi company, to use Arizona water for free to grow alfalfa to send back to feed cows in Saudi Arabia. These kinds of things, really need to be investigated by an active and vigilant Attorney General.
Why is it that in the past few years, it seems, Kris, people have perceived, and perhaps it has been the case, that these offices have become more politicized? Attorneys general have always run as Democrats or Republicans, or in the 19th century as Whigs and various other party affiliations. But for much of our history, and particularly from, let's say, World War II forward, there was the presumption that even though there was some partisan affiliation, that an attorney general was a professional, and that the basic job would be done the same way, whether it was a Republican or a Democrat. Why do you perceive that has changed in places like Arizona?
Well, that is a great question, and I think there is some truth to it. I don't actually think that, I think that most of the politicization is coming out of one political party, and that's the Republican Party. The Attorney General, for instance, in Arizona, and one of the things that I'm most critical of him for, Mark Brnovich, is how deeply he has politicized the AG's office. He has turned it into his own sort of launching pad for his ultimately unsuccessful bid to unseat Mark Kelly here for the United States Senate. He, for instance, took millions of dollars out of that consumer fraud fund I was just talking about and put it in something he called his federalism unit, which was basically designed to go after highly politically charged lawsuits that really looked more designed to get him on Fox News than anything else. And they were lawsuits that were mostly doomed to fail, but that were clearly sort of coming out of one political ideology. And that's really unfortunate, because you're right, Jeremy, this office should be as nonpartisan and apolitical as any statewide elected office is. Except for perhaps the last one that I held, the Arizona Corporation Commission, which is Arizona's Public Utilities Commission. So, you have in the AG's office what is supposed to be the top law enforcement officer. That is not a political job. In the case of a Public Utilities Commission, you regulate utilities, you set energy policy. That really shouldn't be a political job. But, in just too many cases, I think you see in many, and again, I hate to say this, in many cases, it's Republicans who are seeing these jobs as good sort of stepping stones to making it to the governor's office or making it to the United States Senate. That's really too bad. What I have told Arizonans is that I am going to leave politics at the doorstep. And my job is going to be the lawyer for the people of Arizona. My opponent, for instance, talks like he wants to be Donald Trump's lawyer. I want to be the people's lawyer, period, full stop.
So I think that's traditionally how people had talked about the office. So I think you're resonating with the real course of our history until recently, and resonating with what democracy needs. Democracy needs the rule of law. How would that look in practice, let's say, with one of the most controversial issues that I think every state attorney general faces, the question of abortion? Right. I mean, how will you try to depoliticize that issue?
Yeah, and you're right. It is an extremely difficult issue, and that's one of the. I mean, there's so many things that are unfortunate about what the United States Supreme Court did with the Dobbs decision, but it certainly instantaneously through this very highly charged issue back to AGs and to the states, and has created a nightmare scenario, really, where you're going to see ongoing litigation both within states and probably between states, as you see really egregious and terrible situations, like in which states that have banned abortion attempt to extradite women from another state back to their state. One of the things I've promised to do as Attorney General, we're not going to extradite any woman for an abortion prosecution to another state, or we won't allow any woman to be extradited out of Arizona. These are the kinds of crazy situations that we are facing now that the Supreme Court has issued the Dobbs decision and overruled and overturned Roe. How would I handle it? Look, my job as Attorney General will be to uphold the Arizona Constitution. And like a number of states, or several states anyway, Arizona has a very, very robust right to privacy in our Constitution. And the Arizona Constitution is the highest law of the land. That right to privacy, Article 2, Section 8, which guarantees that no person shall be interfered with in their homes or in their private affairs, I believe makes these trigger laws that are on the books in Arizona and that date all the way back to the Civil War era unconstitutional. Unfortunately, the current Attorney General, Mark Brnovich, and my opponent for Attorney General want to re-implement, restore that 1901 law that bans all abortion and would put doctors, nurses, and pharmacists in prison potentially for up to 5 years for assisting with an abortion. And I got to tell you guys, this is wildly unpopular with Arizonans. The vast majority of Arizonans, something like 87% of Arizonans, believe that abortion should remain legal and safe in all or most instances. And I would venture to say the number is even higher when it comes to the number of Arizonans who believe that this should remain a private issue, and that the Arizona constitutional provision protecting the privacy of Arizonans should be the law of the land in our state. So I will enforce the Arizona Constitution, and when I'm Attorney General, we will never prosecute a woman, a doctor, a pharmacist, a nurse, a midwife, or a doula for abortion or abortion care.
But how do you handle an issue like that, where the law is so clearly on one side, or the truth is so clearly on one side, and there remains an intense opposition? How do you remain apolitical while enforcing the law when it seems like the rule of law is itself political?
I mean, it's a great question, but I think you can do it by doing what I am doing when I talk about this issue, which is to talk about the law, to talk about the Constitution, and to stay within the confines of that Constitution. I try to stay out of the political elements of abortion. Obviously, it's hard to do. It's a highly charged issue, and people of good faith believe different things about this, and I fully recognize that. But I also think the vast majority of Arizonans believe in our Constitution and that it should be upheld. And I think they'll support me if they know and when they know that I have a solid legal and constitutional grounding for the decision that I have made about whether or not, in my case, not to prosecute women, doctors, and nurses for abortion. And so I think what you do is you just have to continue to talk about it in terms that are grounded in the Constitution and the legal reasoning behind why I'm not going to prosecute people for abortion in Arizona. Ultimately, there will have to be a political solution to this question. I mean, the people of Arizona will need to put this issue to rest, and I think they're going to. I think that in a couple of years we will have a ballot initiative in 2024 that will say Arizonans believe in the right to choose, that Arizonans believe in privacy, and that abortion should be legal. That will be on the ballot. I believe it will pass overwhelmingly based on the polls already in Arizona. And so the Constitution will have even more clarity than I think it already does.
And I really like your point, Kris, about the way we talk about issues. This is a recurring theme for us each week, and it goes back to the history of our republic from its very founding. Democracy is not simply about power. It's about justice and about the ways in which we frame our discussions, which is why our founders spent so much time arguing and writing about these issues. 100% of the people are never going to agree on anything. But we have to make valid arguments that are not simply about my side being right and your side wrong, but more about a process of justice. And I think you did that really very eloquently right now. It's about the Constitution. It's not really about what you think, right?
Yeah, it's about the Constitution. It's about the process of justice. It's about the fact that, we recognize that there will be likely a ballot initiative in the future where all Arizonans will be able to again weigh in on this issue. And I think I also like to talk about our Constitution, because the Arizona Constitution is it's a marvelous document. It was fashioned between 1910 and 1912 when we became a state. It's actually a quite progressive constitution. It was crafted during the sort of trust busting era of the United States, sort of Teddy Roosevelt times. We had very progressive Republicans and conservative Democrats who gathered at our constitutional convention, and they crafted this very robust right to privacy because they were concerned. They also crafted a corporation commission that was elected statewide. They were worried in that case about the power of monopoly utilities, the power of big railroads over individuals. In the case of the right to privacy, they were worried about an overweening government's power to intrude on the privacy of Arizonans in their homes, in their private affairs. And so I think that is our Constitution. And that is the supreme law of Arizona. And I believe it's my duty to uphold that Constitution until it is altered or changed. It may be changed. I think it will be to actually reinforce the right to choose in Arizona.
And as you said so well, that's the core mission of any state attorney general, which is to defend the state's constitution. Yep. If I could ask one more question, and I ask this in light of the current politics that we're in, what is it like to be a woman running for this kind of office, an office that's traditionally been held by men, where there is such a sort of forceful argument, almost violent argument often made on the other side? You're taking this away from us. You're not doing what we want you to do. If you could just reflect on that. I know many of our listeners struggle with these issues. Many female politicians. My wife deals with this, so I'm curious your perspective as a woman running for this office.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I obviously was a woman also running for the Arizona Corporation Commission, which was also traditionally a male dominated office. I think I was only the maybe fourth woman ever elected to that office in 100 years in Arizona. I would only be the second woman ever elected attorney general behind Janet Napolitano. She was AG before she was the governor of Arizona. And I would be the first mom ever elected in Arizona history.
Wow.
Yeah, but long past time probably for that to happen. But, it's interesting. And you're right. There's a lot of aggressive, language used, in even some violent language used on the other side. But I tell you, I'm pretty tough too. I'm a pretty aggressive. I'm pretty aggressive in defense of my views and in defense of what I think is right for Arizona. But I think here's the deal. I mean, I believe that Arizonans are ready for common and really crave common sense, solutions oriented elected officials and politicians. They're kind of sick of the nonsense rhetoric that we've been getting, especially from Republican politicians who want to keep talking about the 2020 election. And, my opponent wants to decertify the 2020 election, which is not only illegal, there's really no mechanism to even do it. So, it's utter absurdities. And they want people who come to the table, whether they're a woman or a man, who they just want people to come to the table with solutions to the really hard issues that we have in our state. We have a water crisis. We have a fentanyl crisis in Arizona. We have an explosion in the levels of elder abuse in Arizona. We have a consumer fraud crisis in Arizona that has to be tackled. We are one of the, if not the fastest growing state in America, one of the fastest growing states in America, which presents issues, but also great opportunities. And, we have an extraordinary opportunity to shine, to be a great state. But we've got to do better in so many of these areas and metrics, including education funding, and I want to be a part of that solution. So, I think that whether you're a man or a woman going to the polls, however old you are, however young you are, I think they're going to be looking for people who are talking about issues, who are talking about the future, and who are not talking about the 2020 election.
Makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. And it's good mom's common sense also, right?
Exactly.
So we always like to close on a positive note on how a historical and political analysis can move us forward, just as you said, because there's certainly enough pessimism and cynicism out there all around us. So how can our listeners who want to make a difference, how can they get involved? What do you think would be most helpful for them to do?
Boy, here's my pitch. Wherever you are listening in the United States of America, or wherever you are, but especially in the U.S., take a look at your attorney general's races. These races are going to be critical in 2022 for the future of our country. And make sure that whoever you're voting for believes in American democracy, believes in the rule of law, and is not focused on who won the 2020 election. And I think if you do that, if you focus, we've got incredible AGs running across the country who are going to be pivotal to defending our country's democracy in 2024. People like Dana Nessel in Michigan, Josh Call in Wisconsin, of course, me in Arizona, Jen Jordan in Georgia, Daniel Uhlfelder in Florida, Rachel Garza in Rochelle Garza in Texas, and Aaron Ford in Nevada, among others. These AG races are really critical to whether or not we can preserve a healthy democracy in America. And we absolutely can, and we absolutely must. This country has given us so much. And whether you are, the leader of a nonprofit, the leader of a corporation, a mom, a dad, a teacher, these races are critical to our future and to the future of our kids.
Zachary, are young people paying attention?
I think they are. I certainly am, as someone who's going to get to vote for the first time in 2022.
Yay.
And I think that really, I think that young people want common sense and they want it fast. And I think that hopefully with a new generation of voters like myself and a new generation of citizens, we will have a push towards a more common sense, problem-solving, dedicated, public service-oriented government.
Do young people understand, though, what Kris has explained so well, how valuable and important attorneys general are?
I think so. I do think that the digital age has in some ways made at least campaigning more superficial. Not that it ever wasn't. But I do think that that young people have the ability to be much more informed than in the past. They have access to this kind of information, and the important thing to do is to try and give them not just give them access to this, but encourage them to learn about these issues and to get involved and show them that they have a place in this discussion.
Right, to seek the truth, as you said in your poem. Well, Kris Mayes, you have educated us, as I'm sure you've been doing in the classroom for years, and as you've done as a really distinguished public servant on the Corporation Commission in Arizona. And I hope all of our listeners will go to your website. It is Kris Mayes, KrisMayes.com. We will put it up with this podcast. Kris, thank you so much, and good luck with your race.
Thanks, Jeremy. Great to be with you guys.
Wonderful having you on. And Zachary, thank you for your poem as always. And thank you most of all to our loyal listeners for joining us for this episode of This Is Democracy.
This podcast is produced by the Liberal Arts ITS Development Studio
and the College of Liberal Arts at the University of Texas at Austin.
The music in this episode was written and recorded by Harris Codini.
Stay tuned for a new episode every week. You can find This is Democracy on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher.
See you next time.